Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, His church, and the spiritual battle that we all face. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, really excited today to be sitting down with Travis Uptegrove. Am I saying your last name correctly?
You got it.
Travis Uptegrove. That's one of those names you want to just keep saying over and over again, like Isabella Rossellini, Travis Uptegrove. You know, it just kind of rolls off the tongue.
You nailed it.
Okay. Travis grew up in Missouri. He spent 11 years in the Navy, and he moved to Chattanooga in 2008. He's been married for 22 years.
That's right.
Christina?
That's right.
And he's got 4 children, all boys. And make sure I've got this right, ages 9, 12, 17, and 19. So from youngest to oldest, you got a 10-year span.
That's right.
Travis Travis is the founder of a men's ministry called Element 26. And so Travis, it's great to have you on the show, and I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation today because there's, your life experience has got a lot of stuff to talk about. I definitely want to talk about Element 26. You started that 8 years ago.
That's correct.
Okay. The Navy, I didn't know that. 8 years in the Navy.
11.
11.
Yeah, 11 years. Yeah.
Okay. What'd you do in the Navy?
I was an electrician.
I was hoping you would say I was on a boat. But
Yeah. Well, I did do a little bit of time on a boat. That was true. Yeah. So, yeah, it's been 11 years there. Honestly, it was really cool experience for me. I got to be an instructor my last 4 years. So that really just kind of opened up the door for me to get comfortable speaking in front of people, and it's been great experience.
So did you teach people like electrical work? Was it like what you did? I mean, what was actually being taught?
Yeah, so I taught electronic fundamentals, so semiconductors and that kind of circuitry is what I taught.
Me and electricity, we don't get along. I have popped myself more times than I'd like to admit to.
That's a qualification to be a good electrician.
Is it really?
It is. Yeah, it's a requirement. Get shocked a few times.
Well, then I'm up there as a master electrician because I've done it a bunch.
You're set.
My dad one time had to take a broom handle and knock me off of something that wasn't grounded or whatever. It got a hold of my thumb and it didn't want to let me go, and it cauterized. It burned a hole in my thumb. So I'm lucky on that one, I think.
Yeah.
So, and all right, you've got 4 boys.
That's right.
Were you trying for a girl or
no? You know what's funny is we had the first boy, which I was pumped for, and then after that I was like, I'd love to have a girl for my wife. I was like, that way you can have and she was like, nope, don't want girls. So God knew what He was doing. We weren't made for girls, so we've got a house full of boys. So.
I've got one. Our middle child is a girl, and they are different.
Absolutely.
Just the whole, raising them, it's a completely different ball game. I'd say, and my daughter's probably going to kill me for this, but I would say trying to raise a girl, it's like a whole nother species. Like I don't even know if I would put them in the category of human beings.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, Kaylee. I'm just kidding. You're a human being, I promise. Most days. All right. So Navy and this 10-year gap. Is there anything we need to talk about there between youngest and oldest? Is there? I mean, that's quite the range.
Yeah, it is. We had the first 2. That was the plan. Then we got to Chattanooga and decided to have a third one, and that was where we planned to stop. And God said, "How about another one?" So we got another one. So that's how we ended up with 4. Yeah.
There you go. So your wife she's outnumbered at home.
Absolutely.
Is the toilet seat up or down? I mean, is that a huge deal?
We're trained. It's down. Yeah. They've got us trained for sure.
Okay. So it's her against 5 guys, and she's got all 5 of you trained. I'd like to meet your wife.
She's amazing.
Did you guys meet in Missouri?
No, we met in Virginia Beach. It was funny. She's actually from Maryland, just outside of D.C. I grew up in a tiny little rural town in Missouri, and we met in Virginia Beach when I was stationed out there, and she came to visit her parents. We were living down there at the time, and She went home with me and said, "I will never live in the Midwest." And I said, "I will never live in D.C." And we ended up in Chattanooga. It was kind of our compromise ground. So,
and no family here is just like, how does Chattanooga?
Well, it's funny. We kind of looked for places. We were looking at Chattanooga and Louisville because we wanted a place that was, small town feeling enough for me, but big city enough for her. And we got an opportunity to come out here as part of a church plant, and that's what drew us to Chattanooga. And of course, church planting doesn't pay well as a volunteer, so end up got a job out here and I've been here ever since.
Okay, and you work where now?
Work for TVA.
Okay, electrician?
No, I actually work as an instructor, corporate and regulatory training.
Okay, that sounds super boring.
Yeah, it's a lot of computer time for sure. But I enjoy, I do get chances to get up in front of people and teach still, and I do love that aspect of it. To meet a lot of people. Okay. Throughout the Tennessee Valley, and I love that aspect of it.
Okay, so speaking of teaching, let's go ahead and transition then into what I'm really excited to talk to you about and get. I've heard a lot of people talk about Element 26. So you started that 8 years ago. Just tell me what that is. Why did you start it? What was going on there?
Yeah. Well, why did I start it? That's an interesting question. So we'll start with the easier questions. What is it? So it's a ministry. We geared a lot around outdoors. We like to spend a lot of time in the woods, hiking, camping, that kind of deal. We do our big retreat. We are in cabins, but really just trying to get men out away from the world, really, and just have time just to connect and stay plugged in with God that way. So that's kind of the easier part of it. We have retreats. We've got one we do every fall here in Tennessee. We've got one in February that we do down in Florida, and we're looking at a couple other locations throughout the year to pick up on and do. So that's primarily our big events are the retreats, and we just gather guys together throughout the year. We do fire pit sessions once a month out of my house. We do a fire pit out there and gather guys and do that.
So what is a fire pit session?
It's really, a lot of it is just getting guys to connect with other guys. Men have a real tendency to isolate themselves. So we've really strived towards building an environment where guys just feel comfortable. So we always kick off with a good, basically a devotional, kind of a topic, a short devotional, and we kick it off with a question of, how does this apply in your life? And it's just an open-ended question from there. And really just kind of see where God leads the conversation. Sometimes it's, fairly short and to the point, and sometimes it drags out, and, we really get into the heart of what some guys are facing. So, but that's really, and, even in our retreats, that's really the thing we strive for, is just building an environment for men to get connected with other men.
Okay, and so it's a spiritual. It's centered around God.
Absolutely,
as you do in Devo. So it's not just about guys getting together and finding trees to go to the bathroom on.
No, there's a lot of that too. But yeah, no, it is. It's just we really obviously our purpose is Christ-centeredness. We want to keep that as the grounds of it. We want to have purpose in all of our gatherings.
Do you have non-Christians that come to these retreats?
We do. We've actually had several non-Christians that have come. We've had a Muslim that's come a good friend of mine who's been several years. So it's been interesting to see the kind of the audience that we've had showing up.
Do they know before they come that it's there's a spiritual dimension, a godly dimension to it, or is it they're just like, wait, I thought we were just here to fish?
Yeah, we trick them. It's all about trickery. No, I mean it's very open. We're very honest about who we are, and I think some of them are drawn. We've had people come for different reasons. Some of them are a buddy invited them, or they've a brother's invited them, and they're willing to go through this weekend, and we've seen some really really cool stories come out of it through the process of it. But
so I saw a picture online as I was doing just a little bit of background research and just trying to figure out what Element 26 is about. What it from the picture that it looked like a recent retreat. Maybe there's a lot of guys there.
Yeah. We had right around 170 at this most recent retreat that we did.
That's a big group.
It is. It's a really big group. It's nothing we ever imagined that we'd have. We started out with 3 guys in a strip mall and just kind of grew into this.
So 8 years ago, your wife, basically, I'm assuming she says, look, you and the boys have got to get out of the house. I can't take any more men. There's too many of you guys here. I don't care what you do. And that's how Element 26 started, right?
It's funny. You're not that far off. So kind of getting to your question of why Element 26 or how did it start? I was serving in church, very, very active in our church, and put on a good front on Sunday mornings. You know, I looked good, had it all together.
Like most of us do.
Absolutely. Home life was rough. You know, I was not leading my family, was not doing really anything that I portrayed that I was doing on Sunday mornings. So in 2011, I had a son that was born premature, our third son. And after he was born, it kind of wrecked my world. All of a sudden it was, a lot of it for me was a loss of control. You know, as men, we like to control things, and all of a sudden I've got this kid that I can't do anything for, except just sit and wait and go to surgery. So it broke me pretty hard, and there was a lot of anger and bitterness towards God, because I viewed myself as a person that God needed, and I was like, God, you need me right now. Why would you do this to me? And he was very quick to reveal just how much he didn't really need me, but he was willing to use me. So, so through that process, there was a small men's group that was meeting, and that's kind of how I had. My wife was like, you need to go get out of the house and find some guys. So I fought it for a long time. I went one Saturday morning, honestly, just so that I could show that it didn't work. Get in there and be like, see, I talked to these guys, they can't understand, and I got in there, and also I got around a group of guys that really were open and honest and real, and I hadn't seen a lot of that in church. Honestly, it was a lot of other men looking like they had their lives together. Yeah, and these guys were very open, honest, and real, and it made a big impact. And through that was kind of the beginning of our roots. Was just seeing, man, we need a place for more men where they can come be real and just talk about life, as it's really happening. So,
why do you think that men have a tendency to not want to do that? Because we don't. We it's like, I go home at the end of the day, I'm going home, I'm doing my thing. I don't want to get into the touchy-feely kind of stuff. That's how most men are wired. But you guys are coming together, and it sounds like, you're opening up, and you're like doing the emotional stuff, right? That's hard. It's difficult for a lot of guys, especially the older generations. Yeah. Maybe the younger generations don't have as much of a hang up with that, but I know my generation, my father's generation, men didn't cry, men didn't open up. We were these stoic, people who weren't affected by anything. You'd never know what was going on in our minds.
Yeah. And I think you hit on it. A lot of it is generational. It's kind of, we're raised being told that men are strong and men don't cry. And it's kind of this expectation that's set on men of what, how they should portray themselves. And I think we've got a lot of men that are hurt, and they've never had a way to express that or really to deal with that. So instead they just stuff it. And I think that's what really leads to anger. A lot of men battle anger, and they turn to addiction. It becomes an outlet for them because they don't have that outlet. So, and a lot of it, quite honestly, is pride. We don't want other men to see us as weak or vulnerable. Yeah. And I think that one thing that's really important is we're very open and transparent ourselves. I talk about my struggles, and I talk about my battles, and I was one of those. I didn't cry. I refused to cry. And then after my son was born, it broke me to the point that I found relief. I remember the first time sitting around a group of guys, and I just, out of nowhere, started crying. I'm like, what's happening to me? Yeah. kind of thing. But, I just realized that, man, we've got to deal with these things realistic. And so we really try and encourage guys. We don't, try and get out there and say, okay, if you don't cry this weekend, it didn't mean anything, but just really be real, meet men where they're at.
Yeah. I can't help but think from a biblical perspective, this paradigm that we have that I just talked about, this stoic, that really is not a biblical principle. When you read the New Testament and you see how Jesus interacted with his small group, right? These were guys that were intimate with each other. They shared their life together. They shared their struggles together. I think it's James, the half-brother of Jesus, that writes later after Jesus has ascended. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's in the book of James that he talks about confessing our sins to one another. Yep. There's obviously something in that. As people, we need to know that we don't share our sin struggles alone. That we have, or that we don't have to have our sin struggles and not share those with other people, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because there's great unloading, if you will, of stuff. And so it kind of sounds like this meets that niche for men as a venue to actually do that and create that space for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, in that verse you're talking about in James, you know, it talks about our confession. It says that, you know, the prayers of a righteous man avails much. And, you know, we got to understand that, you know, when you get yourself around godly men and you get real with them, having that confession, having that prayer over you, it releases shame. And that's what a lot of men are carrying. And that shame boils into anger, like I mentioned earlier. So, you know, just really from, you know, you're right, from a biblical perspective, like God has called us to have these relationships and have those people in our life that we can be real with. So we do the best we can to kind of to create that environment and do it that way.
And that's supposed to be happening in the church.
Mm-hmm. It should. And, you know, and I'll just be honest with you, that's one thing that I struggle with church-wise is the lack of what discipleship. You know, what is real discipleship? And I think discipleship has turned into a lot of book clubs. And I don't have a problem with book clubs. And I don't have a problem with people that meet to do that. But, you know, really look at Jesus as the example. You know, what did discipleship look like with him? And he was sitting around circles with these men. He was involved in their life. They were engaged together. They walked through things. And of course, ultimately, everything pointed back to a godly approach, or, you know, in our words, be a biblical approach to how to deal with those things. But they were involved in life, and that's a tough thing to do, to make yourself vulnerable enough to get involved with other men's mess.
Yeah,
sometimes that's hard to deal with.
Man, there's so much in what you've just said. I mean, this idea of vulnerability, carrying shame, and having that. I have seen from the college perspective. Man, we had a small group that met together Sunday night at my house. We talked about this very thing. And by the way, I'm not planning this. This is just all, you know, as we're talking about it, right? Because I don't know what you were going to say. But from a college standpoint, what really I see preventing these young men and women from breaking that cycle of addictions and sin and things is a couple things. First of all, they feel like that they are too dirty to be forgiven. You know, it's just like, what's the point? I've done so much. I can't possibly understand how God can forgive a person like me. And with that comes this tremendous amount of shame, this tremendous amount of guilt, and it's just this cycle. You know, they want to break free, but they just don't see how that can possibly happen. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, Travis, but I think that's a picture of what's taking place, not just in the college group, that generation, but our generation, the younger, you know, the next phase out of college, in churches across our nation.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And hang on a second, because
okay.
This is not about church bashing.
Sure.
And I said that's what you've got going on is that really is the picture of like what should be part of a church, or maybe a ministry as part of a church to help facilitate that kind of thing. So this, to the listeners out there, this isn't, you know, we're not bashing churches, because they do a great thing. But, you know, from my perspective, and I'm certainly from your perspective, we see this as a need that perhaps is lacking in the church.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's when we first started this ministry. That's the heart of our ministry, is we want to help equip men to go back into their churches and help fill these gaps. You know, we view it as a partnership between us and churches. You know, and we rely on churches to help us at times as well. So I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't need to be a church bashing session, and there's lots of things we could discuss that have been done wrong, because you know, church is run by humans, and we make mistakes. We're not perfect, but yeah, the churches are doing some great things. We just hope that we can help fill in some of those gaps where there are some shortcomings and make the churches better and more effective.
So what is your hope, your dreams, your aspirations for Element 26? Like where would you like to see that ministry go?
You know, that's a great question. When we first started, I had a guy ask me once, he said, what are you going to do if this thing blows into something big? And I said, I'll quit. Like, it's not what God called me to do. But, you know, God is constantly shaping and molding my heart to really just follow his guidance and what it is. And if you would ask me that question, you know, 8 years ago, I would have never thought we would be where we are. So, you know, ultimately, I want to see this ministry continue to grow in the sense that we're continuing to honor God in how we do it, and help churches to equip their men, and that's what we want to see. Long-term goals. There's a group from Alabama that's come up to our retreat for. They've been up here for 3 years, and they didn't come back this year, and it's a success story that they didn't come back, because the reason they didn't come back is because they've taken what they've gathered from our retreats, and now they're doing their own down there to reach the men in their area, and that's really what it's about. I don't have any desire or care about Element 26 spreading across the country, but if we can be a part of helping these churches find ways to reach men in their church, ultimately that's what our goal is, to continue to make impact in men's lives.
I was planning on transitioning after that question, but you just said something. And it's kind of this discipleship model, where you make disciples who make disciples who make disciples, and I think that's something that most of our listeners can understand from a church perspective, and that is, the Great Commission basically is what Jesus said: Absolutely. Go make disciples. Okay, so it can spread. But you're saying something here that I think is worth talking about and giving life to as we breathe words into this idea of men, leaders, and what's happening in the church today, and the lack of men stepping up. Yeah. And I have no idea if these two things are related, that it's because our society has created a situation where men have to be tough, and we don't show emotions, and we're very stoic and that kind of thing, and it just gets bottled up, and then we turn to things that we shouldn't turn to as outlets, as releases, and then that leads to addiction, which leads to shame. And now you've got men that are chained to sin coming into church. They can't feel good about that. I mean, there's got to be a disconnect, in that scenario where they're looking at themselves and they're going through the motions, but they're thinking in their head, I'm a hypocrite, like a king of hypocrites. We understand we're all hypocrites, right, from time to time, but this is a whole different level of hypocrisy. And, churches are struggling because you don't have men stepping up to lead churches in a godly manner, and maybe these things are connected. Is why churches are struggling. So many churches are struggling, especially post-COVID. Church, a lot of them have shut down, and part of the reasoning is that you can't get any men to lead, to step up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you look at just poll websites, and go through church websites, you'll see that most churches list women's ministry, they list children's ministry, they don't list a men's ministry, and I heard the statistic once that 10% of churches have a functioning men's ministry within them, and I think that's directly related to men, like you're saying, I think they're scared to get involved in a lot of ways, either because they're afraid of putting themselves out there to be vulnerable, or you're right, they're ashamed of what they've done in the past, and honestly, and part of it is men, we make ourselves busy. We load our lives down to the point that I don't have time for church right now, or I don't have time to make that commitment, and it's definitely a balancing act. Especially when you have a family at home. But yeah, I think absolutely. There's so much that comes back to the simple gospel. And men, like we bury ourselves in this mentality of not being worthy of serving. And I kind of made a joke at the retreat this year. I said, if everybody that's at our retreat knew all the thoughts that went through my head, nobody would be there. Yeah. It's the reality that we all have our struggles and our battles, but it doesn't mean that God can't use us. And it's the more that you get involved, the more that you plug in with the right community of men, the more that you're going to grow and see God use you continually, more and more. So there's absolutely a connection.
Yeah. And to what degree, I don't know. I have a tendency to paint with broad strokes, and I think the reality is there's a whole lot of different stuff going on. You mentioned the busyness. That's certainly that I can relate to that. Let's take you for example. You got a house full of kids, 4 kids, and you're doing this ministry, and you got a full-time job, and you got a wife, and you're a busy guy. How does that work for the Uptegrove household? And for you as the spiritual leader of that household.
Yeah, very carefully. I mean, the cool thing is I'm at a stage now where my older two boys are part of my ministry. So, they're getting to go and be a part of it. So, I'm still fulfilling that role with my boys and the things that we're doing. But, I'll tell you early on, when I first started, I jumped into this, and I had great intentions, and I pushed hard, and I, quite honestly, it became an outlet. I mentioned before, I have a special needs son at home, and it was easy because I saw ministry. I was like, oh, this is something I'm having success at and I'm doing well at. So I'll just kind of put my family to the side and I'll focus on this. And, I'll never forget, my wife wrote me a letter at one of our retreats. I opened up and had this letter, and it was, essentially it was, talking about how I was putting more into the ministry than I was my home. And it made me mad in the moment, but the reality was she was completely right. So the thing I've had to learn through that is my wife and my kids have to know they're the priority no matter what. So anytime we plan events, anytime we look at anything, I sit down, especially with my wife, and I sit and we talk through it. Say, hey, what do we have going on? Are you good with me doing this? And the funny thing is I do more with ministry now than I did back then. And my wife's even more supportive. She's always been supportive, but now that she knows she's the priority, that she's gonna stand behind me through it. So you have to be intentional. Your time at home is your time at home, and make sure that. Especially when you have events coming up, it's really easy to get locked into the busyness of prepping for it, but just really being intentional about focusing on your family when you're in your home.
There's a good marriage counseling lesson in this too. The fact of bringing your wife into the loop by communicating it, versus, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you this weekend I'm on a retreat, and then, World War III happens.
Absolutely.
Rather than, the week or 2 weeks or even a month prior to that, say, hey, what do you think about this? This is what I've got, going on. Is that something that you'd be okay with? Mm-hmm. It makes a big difference. And I think as men, that's something we all need to do better at, is communicating and expressing the respect that women deserve as partners in a marriage.
Absolutely. And once they get behind you, it's amazing the difference that it makes, because then, you feel more energized for it because you've got their support behind you. You have your own personal cheerleader, and it makes a difference in your ministry, and it ultimately makes a difference in your marriage, which then is going to trickle down to the relationship with your kids. And, just being on the same page. I talk to a lot of guys that are, they want to get started in men's ministry, and I tell them all the time, like, your home comes first. Yep. Like, don't even bother stepping into it until you've got, things. Not that you're going to have everything perfect by any means, but you need to have a good, solid foundation at your home to step into this. And I don't know that I had that when I first did, so it's more of a lesson learned from me to pass on to them. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I certainly know, growing up as a preacher's kid, and the vast amount of time that my dad was involved with church stuff, other families in crisis, other families in need. You can go across the board and look at preachers' families, and a lot of times you're gonna find a messed up family. So and that's part of this is the neglect that the family. And I'm not saying my dad neglected us, but it's tough to juggle that. Yeah, absolutely. So any kind of ministry work, I think you have to go into that with this idea of partnership and making sure that your spouse is on board with it 100%.
Yeah, and I think you also have to keep in mind that we're not above the rules ourselves. It's easy to put yourself in leadership and think that, okay, I'm leading this men's ministry. My job is to pour into all these men, and that becomes my focus. But I've got a circle of guys that I have to lean into. And I've got guys that when I have a rough day, I'm calling those guys up and saying, hey, let's grab some lunch. I've got some stuff I'm battling with. And, the reality is that, Satan doesn't back off and go, well, now that you're in leadership, I'll attack the other guys. He, continues to come after you.
You got that right. Yeah.
So, I mean, so you do, you got to make sure that the same foundations you're encouraging these men to have, that you're applying to yourself, which sometimes it's easier to say it than do it. Yeah. So just having that reminder.
Yeah. This idea too of our spouses while we're on it, it's, I went through a struggle too earlier on, where I was really overloaded on this campus ministry side of it, because there's always a college kid in need. There's always something going on. And, man, I didn't realize the perspective from my wife's standpoint and the turmoil that she feels, and even expressing the fact that I'm neglecting her and the family. And what does a wife do when she's like, I can't even say anything because it's like, how do I get onto you for serving Jesus? It's like I can't compete with Jesus, and so I think that's an important aspect for anybody doing ministry work to understand the position we put our families in when we decide to serve God in that type of capacity, because it can be tremendous. And we are called as men to love our wives as Christ loved the church, which is sacrificially. Yep. And I think a lot of times, at least in my case, I missed the mark on that one.
Yeah.
So
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And it's important to really focus on my family is my number one ministry.
Yeah.
And, and it's not just in the sense that's my primary focus, which it is, but even in terms of the ministry that I have, I cannot be effective outside of my home if there's turmoil in my home. Yeah. So it's not just, it's amazing how much you realize that the order that God put things in our lives, there's actually a purpose behind it.
Right.
We tend to overlook those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure.
I think this is good that we're talking about this. Again, not planned. I'm totally off some of the stuff that I wanted to hit on, but we're going to hit on those things here in just a second. But especially for church leaders to listen to, if they're listening to this podcast on, men in leadership positions that are like maybe preachers or ministers or whatever, the struggle is real on that, and it's good for the men, the elders, the folks in charge to hear that and understand they need to provide time where the minister, the ministry leader, whoever is taking care of their own family, and they're given that breathing room to do that's part of the priority that they have. Because I know in my dad's time, man, preachers were expected to preach a lesson on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, teach class, do all the funerals, do all the weddings, visit all the sick. The list was a mile long for these ministers, and you can't do that and not neglect your family. There's not enough hours in the day to do that. I think it's gotten better today where that's more understood. But back in my dad's day, preachers during those times were just, man, they were run hard and abused, and
absolutely,
it's unfortunate that so many of them had to go through that.
Yeah,
so.
I think a lot of times we do it to ourselves. I know that this is another great aspect of my wife being involved is I tend to be a control freak at times.
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to see it done this way and I want this way. And to release areas of, the retreat weekend, because when we first started, like I was getting all the food and I was organizing all the cooking and I was doing the check-in and, I run myself right. I'd come back from this event and everybody's feeling refreshed and I'm feeling frustrated and wore out. So, just being able to have the freedom to release those things and trust. And, obviously just in everything you do, you seek God, that God's going to put those men in your life. And that was a big part of our ministry success story. Was early on, it was struggling because I was doing everything my way on my own time. And, when I allowed other men to step into my life and help, not just pour into me, but even be involved and help with running things, it was, it's a completely different event. And I get to enjoy it a whole lot more now than I did then.
Yeah. Okay. So transition a little bit. What is Satan doing to our men and our boys today?
Isolating them. That's one thing we see a lot is men dive into isolation. And I think that's one of the big things. And then they overwhelm them with shame is really the two big things. And it's interesting. At one of our retreats several years ago, we had a box. We had guys write out, what are the top 3 things that you want to leave up here at this retreat this weekend? And then we pulled them out, kind of read through them. And every single sheet of paper to some extent had anger, bitterness, something along those lines. And I think we as men we isolate ourselves, and because we isolate ourselves, we kind of lose purpose, and we lose purpose, it turns into anger and bitterness. And I think the thing is there's so much as men out there, we're called to lead. And I do believe that God gives us that fire for a reason. And when men don't have a way to use that fire for a purpose, it turns into inner bitterness and anger. So, and then isolation and shame. Like I said, it's so easy for men to pull back and think, man, they're not going to understand or they're embarrassed. And, the reality of it is, if you look at the statistics of, just pornography alone in the church, it's huge. And yet men are buried in shame for it instead of realizing this is a real battle that we need to stand side by side through and come through together. So I'd say isolation and shame is really the biggest things that Satan is putting in men's heads. And then, and again, I had a guy who's, he wasn't a believer, and we were talking about, he was asking a lot of hard questions about the Bible. And I stopped him one day and I said, there's one thing about the Bible that I really struggle with. And I said, and it's not, all the crazy miracles and the things that happen. I said, it's the fact that I know me, and I know my heart, and I know the sin of my heart, and I know who I am and the thoughts in my head. And I said, to look at the size of this universe and how minuscule I am, and to know that God cared enough to send his son for me. Like, to me, that's the hardest thing to really grasp in all of Scripture. But what that does is it frees you when you recognize, like, there's no amount of sin that I've done. There's nothing that's bigger than what God did for us. Then it lets you release that shame. And I think that's what a lot of men have to recognize. It doesn't matter what they're buried in or how far they're buried in it. God's still available, and he's still in the process of healing and restoring.
Man, that's powerful. That is so much that you just said is spot on. I don't know if you've read this book here that I wrote during our shutdown. It had reached a point where I said, I need to share what I'm seeing from a college side and what's happening to our kids. They go to college and they're walking away from their faith. And I've got a whole chapter in that book on isolationism and what it has done and the way that it's been set up. And it is genius. I cannot come away from this discussion and not be completely convinced that Satan has designed our technology as a beast against us, because it is a trap, and this comes up almost every podcast. I end up mentioning something, but I can't help it. Just, talk about this and reiterate it. And I'm probably going to, till the day I die, I'm going to be screaming about, technology and isolationism, and be careful. It is Pandora's box.
Absolutely.
Man, it's like a snake, Snakes are beautiful, and they can even be useful at times, anti-venom and that kind of stuff, but you've got to be aware that they pack a punch, and if you don't treat them with the respect they deserve, they're going to get you. And I see so many college students that fall victim to that screen time, and then it leads to something that they ought not be looking at, which leads to going off alone somewhere, and then the next thing you know, they're in an addiction cycle.
Absolutely.
And older men aren't. There's no boundaries on. Satan's not like, I'm just going after this group of men. He goes after them all.
Absolutely.
And I think if churches were honest and opened up, and they found out how many people in churches are actually struggling with pornography addictions, it would blow the roof off every church across the United States. And there would be all of a sudden this mass focus on this is a crisis that we need to get our hands around.
Absolutely.
And I would assume, just based on what you've said so far, that your outreach, this Element 26, deals with that very thing. It provides an outlet to, how do we start dealing with this type of addiction?
Yeah, and it's not a complicated model. I mean, honestly, it's like any addiction. One, you have to acknowledge that you have the addiction, and then two, you have to be willing to get the help. And then, from there, it's, and I have a little different take on accountability. When people talk about accountability, a lot of times it's, dealing with pornography. It's, I got somebody I'm going to get together with once a week, and we're going to talk about my struggle. And, to not oversimplify it, but, if me and you get together and talk about ice cream all the time, I'm going to want a bowl of ice cream. Yeah. So, really my focus is, yes, you acknowledge the problems. It's important to get those out and confess them. But are you replacing it with something? What does your walk with Christ look like? Mm-hmm. And when we get into accountability, really walking people through, okay, what does your daily routine look like? And there's so much amazing research out there about the way our brain works and how it rewires. And as you study that stuff, it's fascinating. Yeah. There's all kinds of research out now about how the brain is not able to withhold anxiety and worry at the same time that it has worship, and the brain can't do it. It's impossible. So, when you're battling these things, when you fill your heart with worship and you fill your mind with worship and God's word, it starts pushing those other things out, and it gives you a foundation to stand on. So a lot of it is, again, there's some great programs out there, but a lot of what we're doing is it's really simple relationships and just being honest about where you are and what you're struggling with.
Yeah. To talk about replacement therapy, anytime there's an addiction, I mean, it as small as whatever, you have to fill that. When you take it away, you've got to fill that with something.
Absolutely.
And I don't think a lot of people realize just how good and powerful Jesus is. I mean, when you really embrace that lifestyle, it's so much better than anything, the trappings of the flesh, the world, that Satan would try to deceive you and say, this is better, this is good, this is going to have long-term consequences for the good. You're going to come out on this on the better end, and it's always a lie. It's never the same. Where Jesus is a long-term solution. So that's a really good point. All right, so your biggest concern for your own kids today and the world that they're going to inherit. We talked a little bit about, having our generation is, having both feet in two different worlds. One foot is in this postmodern world, and the other foot is back when things were much more simpler, the post 9/11 world, more innocent, if you will. Not to say that, there was bad stuff going on when we were kids, but it's just, as well as I do, it was a different picture back then.
Absolutely.
And so this exponential increase into, this world of immorality and just everything being accepted and good and fine. It doesn't matter what you like, what your truth is. We're going to accept that.
Right.
So all of that to throw at you and say, what's your biggest concern for your own children as they inherit this world?
Sure. Yeah. And the thing is, if you look through history, men have always been evil. There's always been evil in the world, but we just have access to so much of it now.
Yeah.
And our kids are growing up in a generation where they are constantly bombarded with social media and the unfiltered opinions of so many. And they're, specifically faith is constantly under attack. And, the thing we have to realize is even if our kids aren't on social media, they're still influenced by social media because their friends are, and then their friends are going to be influenced. So, for me, and again, I'm a simple-minded person, but for my boys, I want them so rooted in God's word that they understand that when something's come at them, when it's truth or not. And something I've really, really strived for is for my boys to have men in their lives that are going to speak life into them. And it's interesting, especially having teenage boys. You can talk all day long to them, and they're still going to struggle. And it's been funny a few times, especially my oldest. He'll have a conversation with another male, and he'll come back to me like, "Dad, he gave me this great advice." I'm like, "Wow, that sounds like what I've said for the last 3 months."
I've been there. Yeah, I know what you're saying.
And honestly, at first it used to frustrate me, but I just have to embrace it. That's just the way they are. They're especially as they get older. It's a natural thing to want to break away from their father and be on their own.
Yeah, and so not unhealthy either.
It's healthy. Yeah. It's what should be happening. Yeah. And so for me, my concern is what does the future look like for my kids? They're going to get bombarded with some really, really ugly stuff, and it's only getting worse. And I think our focus as parents has to be, it's great to have a ministry, but our job as parents is first and foremost in our home, and we have to focus on our homes. And I think we're relying too much on church youth groups to raise our kids, and love church youth groups. There's some great ones out there. They're doing amazing things. But if that's all your kids are getting, then I think we're missing the mark. So for me, I just, I want to pour into my kids as much truth as I can, without frustrating them with, too much.
Yeah.
But, just having a genuine relationship with them and just pouring that truth into them. But yeah, my biggest concern really is it's the amount of garbage that's being thrown at them on a regular basis and putting them in a position where they can stand. And I think a lot of that comes down to having really open, honest conversations with them. I want an environment where my kids can always feel comfortable coming back to me and talking to me about stuff. And then also having them involved with other men. It's when we started Element 26, it was 18 and over was our original age group, because 18 is a man and we were a men's ministry.
Yeah.
And we lowered it to 16 because partially, honestly, for my own selfish reasons. I wanted my boys involved sooner because I want my boys to graduate high school already being a part of men's ministry. I want it to be such a normal part of their life to seek other men out and have those relationships that when they go off on their own, it's just a normal thing to be a part of. And I feel like a lot of times we separate the youth from the men, and then when they turn 18 and they leave for college, we're like, okay, well, good luck. Go be a man. So,
I'm glad you said that especially about the job of parents at home. We are the primary influencers of our kids and planting the spiritual roots and preparing them that's needed. And unfortunately, when youth ministry was introduced, there was this, I think, collective sigh of parents across the nation. They were like, "Whoo, finally, I don't have to be responsible for screwing my kid up," spiritually speaking. That's on the youth minister. That's what we pay him to do, Yep. And really, the shift of the primary responsibility going from home, what mom and dad were supposed to be doing, to the church, to the youth ministers, which really ought to be supplemental, as things stand. And so we've gotten away from that, and I think that's something a lot of church leaders need to embrace, that fact, whether or not they're they're willing to admit it, or parents, whether or not they want to admit the fact that they've pawned their kids off on the church to raise them, spiritually speaking, is a huge concern.
And I think that carries over into our adulthood, because then we carry that same mentality to now it's the pastor's job. It was my youth leader's job. Now it's the pastor's job to lead my family and teach my family. And, it's become an easy out, quite honestly, for dads specifically.
Absolutely. Man, this has been a great conversation. So, timeline is getting, or time is getting, timeline, I don't know why I said, our time is getting away from us, but I wanted to ask you, what's the future look like for you? Like where are you going to be in 10 years? Where do you hope to be in 10 years?
Man, that
sounds like a job interview question.
It does. Where do you hope to see yourself in 10 years? It's hard to say, especially with my kids spread out the way they are, I'll still be in that role. But the thing that I'm learning is especially now having a son who's a young man now, is that role doesn't change. I continue to be dad to him. It looks different, but continue to be in that. But my role, honestly, I'm just listening to where God wants to take me at this point. I've tried to plan ahead and think, hey, this is where I'm going to go. And I've learned that God sometimes says, no, you're not.
Right.
So really, it's hard to say, where do I see myself in 10 years? Family wise, we plan on staying in the Chattanooga area, we plan on being based here. I don't have any intentions at this point of walking away from my job and doing full-time ministry, but just continuing to do what God leads me there. As these doors open ministry-wise to plant places, in different places around the country. So we're looking at 3 different locations right now to possibly plant retreats.
Okay.
And, just being open to what God continues to do. And the one thing I will say is, as I get older, I think that I have to focus on is the importance of the Paul and Timothy relationship. And, I'm not going to be able to run Element 26 forever. And whether that's one of my sons decides to step up and fulfill that, whether it's called Element 26 or whatever, I have an obligation to start looking to the future. And these college students that you work with is, how do I raise them to continue, to take that torch and continue to carry that forward? And so that's really, the focus of my future. Obviously I've still got a 9-year-old at home, so I'm still doing the parent role, but ministry-wise, the focus of my future is really starting to look towards what does that look like for the next generation, but not giving myself permission to quit either. That's something I've run into. I've met men in the church that they've retired from work, and it was like, well, that means I'm retired completely, and that's completely the wrong attitude. These young men and women, they need the elders in our church.
Absolutely.
They need their wisdom. They need their experience to step in. So, just seeing where God takes me in that. I'm trying to deny the getting older part in the process.
I see some gray trying to peek out a little bit in the beard there too.
It's getting a lot easier to find it. Yeah.
So we didn't even talk about why'd you call it Element 26? That's is iron or what? I'm not a chemistry guy, so.
Yeah.
What's behind the name?
Yeah. It's funny. So it came to me years ago when I lived long before I even started the ministry. I came across, Proverbs 27:17 is iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. And I was reading something I saw, Element 26, and I thought, oh man, that's kind of it'd be a cool name for a ministry or something. And it honestly just kind of got put on the back burner. We actually met for about 3 years as I guess you'd call it a ministry, with a group of guys for about 3 years before we ever launched Element 26. So 8 years ago we said, well, let's pull up. But yeah, it's based off Proverbs 27:17 is iron sharpens iron is what the verse comes from. And, kind of the meaning behind it for me is if you look at iron itself in its raw form is a fairly soft metal, but it's, when you add impurities to it and through that process, you get steel.
Yeah.
And, that's the thing is all men are going to face impurities. Every one of us is going to face hard times and struggles. So we're going to be hardened. So what does that hardening look like for us? Are we going to be grafted as, once we kind of molded into this hardened steel, do we become bitter and angry and use it in a negative context, or do we use it as a way to strengthen us and use it in a way to really stand for the things that we need to stand for? So that was kind of the meaning behind the original of it.
I love that. That's awesome. That kind of reminds me of the story about, which would you rather be, a coffee bean, a carrot, or an egg? And when you introduce all three of those to boiling water, the egg gets hard and brittle on the outside, but it's just, it's soft, it's pliable on the inside. The carrot just turns to mush.
Right.
But the coffee bean changes its environment.
Yeah.
So that's kind of,
Sure.
reminds me of that. Okay. So talking about element 26 as we wrap up, is there like some contact information or a place, people that listen to this or see this on our YouTube channel, a place that they can go if they want to get more information?
Yeah. Of course, we've got a Facebook page, Element 26 Men's Ministry on Facebook. We're on Instagram as well. Then we can also connect with us at element26men.com is our website. So we have all of our events on there. So we're ramping up now for the Florida event in February. And as this has grown, we're looking for more events and ways to connect guys. But yeah, that's probably the easiest way to stay connected with us.
Awesome. Okay, so appreciate your time here, Travis. And as always, as we close out the show, if you've got a group or you would like to get on the show, just reach out to us. Our contact information is there on all of our media pages. If there's a topic you'd like to hear, let us know what that is. Share with us your feedback. This is as much you all's show and podcast as it is ours. So we want to talk about things that are relevant. So much good information from you today, Travis. I thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better and talking to you about Element 26 in your life and the challenges and the ministry that you're providing this area. Personally, I'm going to pray that it continues to grow and be successful, and that you are able to get this type of thing in all sorts of churches, because I think we need that desperately. So give us your feedback. If you want to sponsor the show, let us know that. We'll plug you if you're a decent type of organization. We're not going to plug something that's bad, but if you're, we'll check you out. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, just reach out to us and let us know that. Our final thought, scripture is Ephesians 6, verse 12 and 13. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another, be kind to one another, and remember that the creator of this universe loves you so much that he gave up his only son for you and me and you. Have a blessed day.